prepare for a rude awakening.
Shalom, Torah fans. This is Michael Rood sailing the Red Sea, or in Hebrew, the Yam Suf, the body of water that the Israelites crossed on dry land nearly 3,400 years ago. In this series, we are heading to the crossing site to watch underwater robotic cameras record coral-encrusted chariot parts strewn across an underwater land bridge. We will then venture to the real Mount Sinai in the ancient land of Midian on the other side of the Yam Suf, where Moses came across the burning bush. At Mount Sinai, we will witness the ancient property markers of the children of Israel, who were promised by the Almighty that all the land from the Euphrates to the Nile will belong to them in the last days, and everywhere they set their feet in this area legally belongs to them. In the previous episode, we remembered Abraham's call by the Almighty to come out of Babylon, leaving Babylonian paganism far behind. Abraham crossed over the Euphrates River, thereby becoming the first Hebrew. Hebrew meaning to cross over. We investigated the abominable religious practices of the Babylonians and Canaanites, only to discover that nearly every one of their vile religious observances have been adopted by modern Christianity. We then considered the everlasting covenant between the Almighty and Abraham, a covenant that cannot be broken, annulled, or changed by either the United Nations or Abraham's offspring. A covenant that grants a huge parcel of land to Abraham's descendants through Isaac and Jacob. Jacob begat 12 sons, 10 of whom sold their younger brother Joseph to a caravan of Midianites. Joseph ended up a slave in Egypt, but by an act of the Almighty became the prime minister for at least 14 years. 7 of those years, the land of Egypt produced bumper crops, and Joseph stored the surplus in the vast grain bins he built in the city of Sukkot, or in Egyptian, Sakrah. The other 7 years were years of famine, which brought Joseph's estranged family to live in the land of Egypt. They entered as freemen, but ended up in slavery and needing a deliverer. Moses was selected for the job. We will continue with the story of Israel's exodus from Egypt that will leave behind them a land ravaged by plagues and the world's largest military force at the bottom of the Red Sea. Now, episode 3 in the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. As you look at your map, the northern part of Egypt, outlined in green here, we see that is the land of Goshen. During the years of famine, the wealth of the world poured into Egypt, and Joseph's brothers came down and purchased grain. Joseph looked like an Egyptian. He looked like a pagan. He had the eye makeup, he had the shaved face. His brothers did not recognize him because he looked like a pagan sun god worshiper. But finally, he revealed himself to his brethren, and Pharaoh gave them the choicest land in the entire land of Egypt, the land of Goshen. And even on the satellite photography, we see that the land of Goshen is absolutely plush. It is green, it is beautiful. But just 100 meters out of the land of Goshen, it is desert. It is sand. There's nothing there. That was a parcel of land that was given to Joseph and his brethren. Another point that I want to bring up concerning this map to give you an orientation of this, because we have got to leave Egypt with all of the children of Israel. And in order to leave Egypt, we look ahead in the biblical record and see that the children of Israel crossed the Yam Suf, as it says in Hebrew, the Red Sea in English. And it says that King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Elat, on the shore of the Red Sea, or in Hebrew, the Yam Suf. This is Elat. This is Ezion-Geber, where Solomon built his navy yard. It's still Ezion-Geber today. It's still Elat today, and this is still the Yam Suf. There is absolutely no question what body of water the children of Israel crossed, either historically, geographically, or semantically. This is the Yam Suf. But there's a problem. North of this is the Dead Sea, the lowest point on planet Earth, once described as a well-watered plain like the garden of the Lord. However, the Dead Sea right now begins a 3,000-mile fracture in the Earth's crust. It's the lowest point on planet Earth. The Great Rift Valley starts at that point and is a fracture in the Earth's crust that goes down 3,000 miles into the continent of Africa. When it goes right down through here, through the Gulf of Aqaba, it is 5,000 feet straight down underwater. You swim out just 100 meters from the shore or wade out there, and it drops off 5,000 feet straight down. When you go out wading and you get up past your ankles and then past your knees and past your weight, and all of a sudden, wham, the next step, you're 5,000 feet right down at the bottom. Didn't even know how you got there. No, if you can imagine it, this great rift in the Gulf of Aqaba is deeper and wider than the Grand Canyon. If any of you have been there at the Grand Canyon, imagine standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and having to cross it. Now we've got a problem, don't we? If the Almighty is going to remove the water in one night, how are we going to get across there with up to 2.5 million people, well, all of our flocks and herds? We've got a problem, don't we? Well, let's see if there's a solution to this. Because now we go back to the land of Goshen. The Israelites are living there, and a generation after Joseph, there comes up a Pharaoh that does not know Joseph, and so he puts the Hebrews in slavery in this area. And in the land of Goshen, just a few years ago, there was a papyrus that was found, and this papyrus, from what they can make out in it, they know that it is a document concerning the transfer of slaves between two Egyptians. And the names on this papyrus, which they have dated to around 3,600 years ago, most of the names are Hebrew. They are Hebrew slaves, and this was found in the land of Goshen. This is Saqqara, Egypt. Now imagine that the city is completely walled and the step pyramid is inside of this walled city. The only way in to this city is to walk through it because the doorway is just big enough for one person to get in. And then as you step in, to your left, there is a cubicle which is about twice the size of the screen that you see before you. It is about a 9 by 12 room cubicle. And right next to it is another cubicle, and it goes on for about 20 of these cubicles. And you have just enough room to walk down and stand before a table or desk at each one of these. And this is where the travelers from other nations would come in. They would go to the desk where their language was spoken. They would pay, and they would receive the bags to continue out that pathway and go out to the grain bins to purchase their grains from Joseph. Right here, as we look down upon it, we see the step pyramid. This is what the Bible calls the city of Sukkot, or tent city, Saqqara. And on your left-hand side are huge, huge grain bins. These grain bins that you see before you are 50 feet across, they are 90 feet long, and they are over 100 feet deep, and then they empty into grain bins which are lower than they are. As you look at this photograph and the next one, you see that we have a stair that goes from the top all the way down. This is not OSHA approved. And after 3,500 years, it is in bad condition. but it goes all the way down 100 feet down to the bottom of this. You see that most of this grain bin is filled with debris because we have buildings that were built over top of it as part of the whole structure that have now collapsed and are down inside. There's a row of these grain bins there, and if you ask the Egyptians, as I have, what they are, they have no idea. Perhaps there's some kind of burial chamber. Oh, yeah, right. A burial chamber, unlike anything else in the land of Egypt, makes absolutely no sense at all, but they certainly cannot be the grain bins that Joseph built, because Israelites were never in Egypt according to modern Egyptology. They have to deny it. Right behind the grain bins, however, are the executive offices. And on the walls of the executive offices, you see the man on the throne, Imhotep, in Egyptian, or Yosef, the scholar, the scribe. You see people bringing in goods to him one way and leaving with goods going the other way. Now, let's talk about what happened after Joseph. The Israelites were enslaved. One of these slaves was hidden away in the Nile River, and the daughter of Pharaoh found him. His name was Moses. She named him Moses, which means to draw out of the water. Moses was raised in the house of Pharaoh. When Moses was older, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he killed the Egyptian. He knew that Pharaoh would find out about it, and so it says that Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. He left the capital and he took the southern trade route. If he took the northern trade route, it would have taken him up into the land of the Philistines and the Canaanites. However, the southern route took him down along what is now the Suez Canal, across the Sinai Peninsula, and then around the northern end of the Yam Suf, or the Reed Sea, down into the land of Midian, where he became a Midianite shepherd in the tents of Yithro, married Zipporah, Yithro's daughter, and it was during that 40 years that he came across a bush that burned but was not consumed. He heard the voice of the Almighty, who spoke to him from Mount Sinai and told him that he would deliver the children of Israel as the promise of the Almighty was made to Abraham. He would be the deliverer, and he would lead the children of Abraham back to that very mountain in the land of Midian to worship him. So, that's the route that he traveled. Now, let's see what happened in this Exodus when Moses went back. And after a series of plagues, finally he was given permission by Pharaoh for all of Israel to leave Egypt and travel 3 days into the desert. That's all we asked for. 3 days into the desert, but we had to take everything with us, which looked a little suspicious to begin with, I'll admit. But all we asked for was 3 days. And it says the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot that were men, beside the children. Ramesses is up to the north, and they traveled down to Sukkot. Why did they all travel down to Sukkot? Ramesses to Sukkot. Because it says Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. And they took their journey from Sukkot. They went down to the step pyramid where the bones of Joseph were entombed in this very city where he built to distribute the grain, and he became the savior of the entire land of Egypt. They entombed his bones, and the children of Israel gathered at Tent City, because just outside of that wall, there is a plain so huge that millions of people could camp. And that's what happened when everyone came from the other nations. They camped, they put their tents up. It became known as Sukkot, or Tent City. That's where they then met all together, because they know where the bones of Joseph are. And so they began their journey from this point, and they journeyed and encamped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. It happens to be the far edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them by the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. We went around the clock, day and night. We traveled 7 days and 7 nights to get down to the Yam Suf. And as we traveled, we had gone 3 days out into the desert, traveling day and night. But we kept going. Now, Pharaoh's sentries all along the trade route then rushed back to the capital and told Pharaoh, Israel has fled. Now, he knew that we left. We left with everything. But he did not know we were going to continue going. They said, Israel has fled. So then Pharaoh assembled all of his charioteers and took off on a dead charge after us as we continued traveling day and night across this desert. When we got to Etham, normally we would go up the north route around the end of the Yam Suf as we traveled up around that. But we didn't go up that way because it says that God led us not through the land of the Philistines, but God led the people about through the way of the Red Sea wilderness. How did he do that exactly? It says instead of going up around the northern end, which was controlled by the Philistines to get into the land of Midian, where Mount Sinai is, instead, he said, turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp by the sea. And we turned from that place, from Etham, and we entered into the Wadi Watir, and now we are going to travel down to Pi-hahiroth. In Egyptian, it is Pi-hahiroth, which means between the gorges. And you'll see that in just a few moments. Just north of there is Migdol, which in Hebrew means tower. It is an Egyptian military encampment on the Yam Suf. Right across 8 miles of water is Baal-Zephon, over against Baal-Zephon. This is the very place in which it took place. The archaeological remains of these things can still be seen to this very day. And it says, ye shall encamp by the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land. The wilderness hath shut them in. And so at Etham they entered into the Wadi Watir, which is a dry riverbed that still to this day is the main route from the beach at Nueva, which you can see right here, Pi-hahiroth, and it is still the main route that takes you to Cairo. It is a main thoroughfare. But it is a wadi, it is a dry riverbed, that once you enter into it, you don't get out until you get to that place between the gorges. This particular photograph was taken just a few years ago when Jamie Louie and I traveled the entire length of the Wadi Watir. This is where we're just entering into that way in the wilderness, and once you enter into that wadi, you don't get out. It is steep, mountains on both sides. If you have technical climbing gear, you can get out, but you don't take your family and your flocks and head over to the side. You are literally entangled in the land, and Pharaoh knows it. This is the main route that Pharaoh would go down to Migdol, down to the military encampment. It's still, to this day, you can see the asphalt highway that goes through there. He knows that once Israel enters into that wadi, he has them trapped, because there's no way out. They travel down this wadi and they get out to what is now called the beach at Nueva, and you see to the south, the mountains go all the way to the sea. There's no passage to the south. To the north is Migdol, the military encampment. Israel has their back to the sea, and Pharaoh's chariots are charging down that gorge. They are dead. This very situation led Yul Brynner to say, the God of Moses is a very bad general. There is no way out. They are dead, and they know it. A number of years ago, an amateur archaeologist found a Phoenician-style pillar right on the beach here at Nueva. This Phoenician-style pillar was laying awash on the shore, and when he saw it, he alerted the Israelis, because the Israelis held the Sinai Peninsula at that time. They looked at it, and they had gone to grade school. They looked at it and knew this is a Phoenician-style pillar from the time of Solomon. Common knowledge. This is exciting. They had the Army Corps of Engineers bring in a huge crane. They picked up this pillar from the time of Solomon, which goes back about 3,000 years, and they set it in concrete. They were excited about this. Had no idea where it came from, but this amateur archaeologist found it because he was doing something very novel. He was doing something that professional archaeologists don't do. Now, I will tell you, the name of this amateur archaeologist is Ronald Eldon Wyatt. Why he was a amateur archaeologist is because he was a nurse anesthetist by trade. And that's where he made his money. But he spent all of his money doing something that professional archaeologists don't do. See, what professional archaeologists have done, and these schools in America, they have funded archaeological expeditions to this part of the world, heavily funded. They can afford to go over there and spend decades digging holes and searching for things of antiquity in places where the Bible never said anything took place. So they search for an entire decade in some place that, according to the biblical record, you'd never find anything. And at the end of that time, they say that the Bible is full of errors because this never happened. Oh, brilliant. That's genius. Mr. Wyatt did something different. He carefully looked at the biblical record. He analyzed the original Hebrew text, and he followed these paths out and found himself right at this shore, and on this shore he found a Phoenician-style pillar from the time of Solomon. A couple of years later, he took a rubber raft and, braving the Arabian gunships from the other side, crossed the Yam Suf, 8 miles, and found an identical pillar, still standing, however. Instead of being awash on the beach with everything being eroded from it, this was standing, and in ancient Paleo-Hebrew, it could be made out. Shlomo, Solomon, Mitzrayim, Egypt, death, Pharaoh, and Yod-He-Vav-He. From that, he knew that Solomon, the wisest man in the world, who built his navy yard at Etzion-Geber, just 70 miles north, knew where the crossing site was, and he erected these pillars on each side of the Yam Suf as a memorial to Yahweh for the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea on dry ground. Now, in the subsequent years, Israel had to give back the Sinai Peninsula. But after they gave back the peninsula, then the coral-encrusted remains of Pharaoh's chariots and army were found, strewn for over 1.5 miles on the bottom of the Red Sea. Tonight, you are going to go down with the most sophisticated robotic underwater dive cameras and high-resolution cameras as we go down there among Pharaoh's chariots and army. You're going to see things tonight that Mr. Wyatt never had the funding to bring out. He could never bring these things out because he just never had the finances, didn't have the time, didn't have the support. And Mr. Wyatt traveled many years ago with the Prophecy Club laying many of these things out. But Mr. Wyatt died. And when he died, his work was finished. But yet the hand of the Almighty was not shortened, because he already put other people in place that were going to take the things that he found to the next level and far beyond anything that Mr. Wyatt could ever imagine. People with qualifications to do things that Mr. Wyatt never had, because he was just simply a servant. He did what he was supposed to do during his lifetime while he was alive. But tonight you are going to see the rest of the story, because the book of Acts is still being written. The Acts of the believers, moved by the Holy Spirit in ways that they couldn't even imagine at the time, are being led to bring forth things to put in our hands in this day and time so that we can stop the mouths of scoffers and we can give hope to those who desire to hear and to see. It was many years ago that I first saw a Prophecy Club video that was given to me by a pastor out on the West Coast. I'd been teaching all day on Bible prophecy, about 9 hours. I was exhausted, but this pastor came up to me and said, they found Pharaoh's chariots and army strewn for 1.5 miles on the bottom of the Red Sea, and we've got it on video. I tried to hide my look of disbelief, and I said, well, do you have a copy? Could you bring it to me? And I said, I've got a copy. He gave it to me. I went home, and at about midnight, after teaching all day long, I put that video in. I watched it. I rewound it. I watched it. I rewound it. I watched it until 5 o'clock in the morning, and I said, this is the greatest tool I have ever had in my hands in my life. And I thought, why has this not spread like wildfire through the Christian church? I am not an unaware person. I didn't consider myself completely out of the loop. But yet, some of this had been out for years, and I had no idea. Why haven't I heard about it? Well, I realized after about a week, the reason why more people haven't heard about it is because in 1 week, I only showed it to about 5 people. And I thought, at this rate, that's why no one hears about it, because if everyone was doing what I was doing, no one would ever get to hear. 5 people in a week. Join us again next time for episode 4 of the 11-part series, The Sinai Connection, Israel's ancient title deed to the land. This is Michael Rood sailing the Yam Suf, bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.